Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world, but those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him.
When Jesus arrived in Bethany, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Since Bethany was only about 2 miles from Jerusalem, many people had come out to console Martha and Mary about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, while Mary stayed at home with the mourners. When she got to Jesus, Martha said, if you had been here, my brother would never have died. Yet even now, I am sure that God will give you whatever you ask. Your brother will rise again, Jesus assured her. Martha replied, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Those who believe in me will live, even if they die, and those who are alive and believe in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Martha replied. I have come to believe that you are the Messiah, God's only begotten, the one who is coming into the world.
Our third reader, are you muted?
Gary is muted.
Okay. Sorry, I thought you had unmuted me.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm reading from the Message. Sorry about that. We'll start again. After saying this, she went to her sister Mary and whispered in her ear, the teacher is here and is asking for you. The moment she heard that, she jumped up and ran out to him. Jesus had not yet entered the town, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When her sympathizing Jewish friends saw Mary run off, they followed her, thinking she was on her way to the tomb to weep there. Mary came to where Jesus was waiting and fell at his feet, saying, Master, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her sobbing and the Jews with her sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him. He said, Where did you put him? Master, come and see, they said. Now Jesus wept. The Jews said, Look how deeply he loved him. Others among them said, Well, if he loved him so much, why didn't he do something to keep him from dying? After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man.
I'm reading from the New International Version. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I don't remember what number I'm supposed to be reading to. 44. Okay, there we go.
Take off the grave clothes and let him go. In the NRSV, it says, at that last verse, let me find it here. It says, Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Take off the grave clothes, let him go, unbind him and let him go. My friends, this is the calling that we have been issued, that we are to unbind, that we are to take off the grave clothes and let him go. This is the word of God for the people of God. I love that the, whoa, sorry about that for you. Oh, I think my screen is doing funny things, and I think that's not, that may be messing you up. Hold on, just a minute. Whoa, there we go. This particular story is one of many in the book of John that we get to hear during this season of Lent. So you may know that the church at some point in time decided that what we should do in worship is go through the Bible in a 3-year cycle, and that's called the lectionary. And this reading is one of many that is chosen for us in lectionary cycle year A. So there's year A, year B, and year C. And each week there are readings from the Old Testament and the New Testament and from the Psalms. Last week, Pastor Darren preached on the 23rd Psalm, and the 23rd Psalm is, of course, just such a wonderful and comforting psalm that, and we get to read it during this time of Lent, this time when we are intentionally turning toward God. We are also, we understand ourselves to be, and this year in particular, we are entering into kind of a wilderness area, a time and a discipline of considering who we are and who we are in relationship with God. And so last week when we looked at the 23rd Psalm, although we are in this wilderness time, we know that God is with us. We know that there is this vision placed before us of a beautiful green valley and of a stream, and we know that God wants goodness for us and is carrying us and is caring for us and is keeping us safe even now. That particular psalm and these readings from the Gospel of John and the other readings that are in year A of the lectionary are the ones that have been read for centuries to those who are entering into the Christian faith. So when the church first decided, okay, we're going to regularize these readings, the first thing they did is said, we will take what we have used as the catechism, as the teaching for the new Christians, and we will place that in Lent in year A. So these readings are the readings that would have been used to teach new Christians about the faith from the very beginnings of when we had Scripture. So these particular readings were lifted up by the earliest of our ancestors in the church as integral to understanding what it means to be a Christian. And I think it's fascinating because what they lifted up weren't a lot of theological teachings. They weren't a lot of do this, don't do that, and we do have those in the Bible. You know, we have the rules and the regulations, as it were. But they lifted up stories. They lifted up stories of individuals and their encounters with Jesus. So we hear about the woman at the well, right? And we hear today about Lazarus. We hear about these individuals who encountered Jesus. And we come to understand who God is through these stories. It is an interesting thing about our faith, how much of it is based in story, in narrative. That we develop a relationship with God through Christ Jesus, through coming to understand who he was, how he lived, who he encountered, and how they encountered him. It's an invitation. It's an invitation for us to enter into relationships. And so what I really love to do when it comes to these stories, what I really love to do is I like to enter in as a character, as a person in the story. And I have kind of explored this particular story with Lazarus for years, and I do a monologue based on this story. And I was going to do it for you today, but I didn't think it would really carry in this medium. I didn't think if I pulled on a baseball cap, you would really maybe think I was somebody different. It's amazing how that works in person, you know, how you can pull on a baseball cap and you can change your voice a little bit and everyone says, oh, you know, she's somebody else. But I just want to tell you about that story and about that way of entering in. Because I didn't think it would quite carry on the screen. Who I play is not a person in the text. It is not Mary, it is not Martha, it is not Lazarus, it is not Jesus, it is not one of his disciples, but it is rather someone who is a reporter for either the Examiner or the Star. You know those papers, those tabloids? You know them, that you get at the grocery store, you know, and they have fantastic stories in them. Well, this particular reporter, his beat was the extraterrestrial beat. So his particular thing was that he would go out and interview people who had met with extraterrestrials or had been taken up into the spaceship or had somehow had this encounter with these other beings, or so they said. And he was on vacation. He had he had put off his vacation, and he decided he would go on his vacation to Bethany, which is the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Now you have to kind of open up your minds and think about, okay, you have this reporter from our time here back at that time there. You got to kind of make some leaps here. But in any case, he is there at Bethany, and he knows about Lazarus and Mary and Martha. Everyone in town is talking about them because Lazarus got this illness and he died, and everyone in town knows that he's a friend of Jesus. And they all expect that Jesus would have shown up when he was ill because Jesus was a great healer, and here Jesus didn't. And so there's quite a bit of talk around the town about who is this Jesus really anyway, and we've seen him come and go, and we've thought a lot of him, but we don't know how much we think of him now. And here Lazarus has been dead for a few days, and people have been coming and going back and forth to Mary and Martha's house. Mary and Martha living outside of town. And this one day, it's a particularly beautiful day, the people of the town decide, well, we're going to all take picnics, and we're going to go visit Mary and Martha, and they have a beautiful, beautiful land there. And we're going to go out there, and we're going to take our picnics, and we're going to be there together, and we're going to, you know, just bring some joy to their life. Everybody bring a musical instrument, we'll play some music, we'll bring our kids, we'll play games, we'll be out there with them in their big yard, you know, we'll do that together. And so this man, he's vacationing there, but he is taken up with this, and people say, you come too, you come too. So he decides to come out, and he brings with him his sketch pad and his colored pencils, which he always brings with him because he happens to be an artist on top of everything else. And yes, somehow I thought that this reporter needed to be a he rather than a she. So he goes out there with his pad of paper and everything, and everyone's going out to see Mary and Martha and to have this great picnic and to have this day in the midst of all this grief. And he gets out there and he starts talking with the people, and he's sharing his art supplies with the kids, and everyone's having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden there's this just kind of this murmuring and this whispering through the crowd, and everyone's saying, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming. We hear Jesus and his disciples are coming. And some people are very skeptical of this, and some people are like, well, he should have been here days ago. His friend has died. He's been in the tomb. He's begun to stink. You know, this is you know, we're well past time, you know. And folks are kind of, you know, looking around to see what's happening, what's going on. And sure enough, here comes Jesus and his disciples down the road. Martha goes out to meet them. They see Martha go out of the house. They see Mary come out. They see Jesus come over to where the tomb is. And of course, it's like there's like a cave and a hillside there, and there's a rock. And he's talking to people there. And then they see that the rock is being rolled away. Well, everyone is very curious about what's going on at this point, and everyone kind of gets up and moves toward that place where the rock's been pulled away, and everyone's actually holding their noses, you know, because it stinks, you know, it's not good. We're not supposed to touch our faces, but that's what they were doing. They were doing this because, my goodness, you know, what's happening, and we can smell, and this is awful, and what is going on? And Jesus makes a motion like, everybody just calm down, you know. And it's clear that he is distraught. He is just weeping and weeping and weeping. And still he's putting his hands out and he's saying, okay, enough. And everyone becomes quiet. And then he in a loud voice says, Lazarus, come out. Well, there's a gasp. There's a gasp through the crowd. And this man himself is there, and he's beginning to take notes. He's a reporter. He's taken it down. He's like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden a newsworthy event, and this has nothing to do with extraterrestrials, and this is not at all bizarre, except this is really bizarre. This is the most bizarre thing, but I'm witnessing this. And for all these years, he's gone and talked to people who are supposed eyewitnesses of these fantastic events, and he's pretty sure most of them are not right in the head. And here he is witnessing something and realizing that he is right in the head. He keeps kind of, you know, hitting himself, kind of coming to, kind of like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. This is really happening. And I'm not crazy. This is really happening. And he's writing it all down. And Lazarus comes out. He's wrapped in these grave clothes, and it smells, and this is, I mean, people are shocked. There's a lady over at out of just in his peripheral vision who passes out. What's happening? And then Jesus turns to the crowd and says, take off his grave clothes, unbind him, unbind him. And there are some who move forward, particularly the women, move forward, and they gently begin to take the grave clothes off of Lazarus. And someone runs and gets some water, and they come to wash his body. And he's alive. Well, in all the years of this man reporting fantastic events, he's never seen anything like this. So he stays to see this through, writing all the time. He wants to go over and interview Jesus, but he's actually afraid to do it. He's afraid to actually talk to that man, and he's surrounded by his disciples, and he's now moving into Mary and Martha's home, and somehow this reporter feels that it's just too sacred a space, too much of a moment to knock on the door and say, I want to talk to Jesus, I want to get his views. Instead, he just writes it all up. He goes back to where he's staying, he types it up, and he sends it into his editor. And as he sends it in, and as he finishes it up and he sends it into his editor, this fantastic raising of Lazarus, this thing that has happened, he also decides to write a resignation letter. And he includes his resignation letter with this essay, with this report. And he says to his boss, he says, I don't want to do this anymore. What I've been doing doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. Yeah, people spin these fantastic stories and people pick up our tabloid and they're entertained by it, but it doesn't matter. This is something that matters. This man who was dead has come back to life. This Jesus raised someone from the dead. He's changed everything. His disciples say that he is the embodiment of the very living God. And indeed, even death cannot stand against him. He said, all I want to do now is follow him. I will be following him and chronicling his story. And that's what he did. He left his job that day, and he went and waited outside of Mary and Martha's house. And when Jesus came out, he said, I want to follow you. And Jesus said, come and follow me. And he began writing, and he began writing, and he began writing all that Jesus did and all that he said those last days of his life. Can we imagine? Can we imagine what it would have been like to be there and what a difference it would make in someone's life to see this happen? I mean, we tend to say, well, it's not true, or we tend to say it's too fantastic, or we tend to say, well, that just couldn't be. But if we enter into the story, the narrative, you know, there's truth in novels, right? And we enter in and get taken up by the novel. There's truth in great stories. There's truth when we go to watch Harry Potter, or we go to watch Star Wars. We get caught up in the story, right? We get inside of it. There's great truth in those stories. There's great truth in this story too. There's great truth in this story because we are not held by death. And we know that in our own very lives. We know that there are times when we are dead to who we are. We are dead to our better selves. We are dead to the beauty and the wonder and the grace of life. There are times that we are dead, and yet we come back to life. Our faith helps us to come back to life. Our faith offers us grace and forgiveness. Our grace reminds us through, as we heard last week, the Psalms, through the readings, also through experience, through a relationship with God through Christ. We know that God is with us. We know that we are not alone. We are offered life again and again and again. In the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, God says to the people through Moses, he says, I have set before you life and death, therefore choose life that you might live. We are offered life again and again and again and again and again. And so I ask you that during this time when we are so aware of death, when everyone around the world is having an incredible experience of facing our own mortality, every one of us has this thing hanging over our heads. We know people who are ill. We know people who are isolated. We know people who are dying. There is death all around, and yet our God is calling us to life. So what is it in you during this time that needs to be unbound? What in you during this time is awakening? Maybe it's something that you don't even like. Maybe it's something about yourself that you're realizing when you're with your family 24/7 that you're not the best person, that you're not always your better self. Maybe you're realizing ways of being that you need to change, that you need to address to be more loving. What is opening in you? And who are you looking to unbind you? Because that's the thing. Jesus called Lazarus forth. He called Lazarus back into life. But then he said to the community, unbind him. Unbind him. And so we need to look to our family, our friends, others around us to unbind us. We need to say to people humbly, I need help with this. I need to overcome this place of stuckness in my life, this way of thinking of things. Used to be this character on Saturday Night Live that talked about the stinking thinking. We need to overcome our stinking thinking, the way in which perhaps we condemn ourselves, condemn others. We need to become more loving, more positive, more open, more forgiving. Especially in this time, we need to have significant conversations with those we love. We need to open up and do that. And we need friends to help us. We need folks to hold us accountable, to help us with the changes we need to make. And so, again, what is needing to be unbound? What awakening is happening? And who are you turning to in this time? Who are you turning to in this time? Let's consider those questions as we enter into a time of confession. Confession is not where we beat ourselves up because we have failed so many times. It's really a turning again, metanoia, turning again to God and saying, I'm here. I know you love me. And I'm realizing now that there are these places in my life where I haven't been my better self, where I have been dead to life itself. And I offer those to you, dear God, for your help, for your forgiveness, for your grace.